Hey everyone, this is Jose Otero for IGN.com, and I'm here with
Schneider, also from IGN.com.
And so we've been talking about this for a while. Welcome to the first installment of, months in the making, The Legend of Zelda playthrough in chronological order.
Yeah, that's right. We're going to start with the first game in the storyline. You know, technically, of course, there are bits and pieces of the story that happened before this game that were referenced in other games like Ocarina of Time, but we're going to start here, and we're going to, I don't know how we're going to deal with the branching story parts. We'll just have to pick one at a time and then go through them, but we want to play through all of the Zelda games, and if we get to it, maybe we'll even do the CDI games, which are not included in the storyline. We'll just have to make up our own story.
Yeah, we'll make up our own alternate timeline and add it. So in case you're wondering, as a Zelda fan, you should know that last year for the 25th anniversary, or around the timing, a book called Hyrule Historia came out. Came out in Japan first and had basically a timeline that was made by Nintendo. Now, initially, the Zelda games referred to each other in passing, but this was sort of the definitive setup for, okay, here's the beginning point, the very first story in the Zelda series, up until later, and the branching timelines, as Per mentioned.
Yeah, and what happened, it's not that Nintendo planned out the timeline like this from the beginning, right? The Legend of Zelda games were meant to be legends, you know, the same story retold in different media and on different machines, too. And
even
so,
CDI.
Yeah, and so always changed. CDI is different. Somebody didn't retell the story; they just botched it. But what Nintendo, of course, did later is try to kind of put this together and make sense of it, and they actually adapted the story to play into that new timeline they came up with. So maybe going forward, instead of kind of ignoring what came before and then having to shoehorn or hammer the story elements in, they're actually going to pay attention and develop this.
And so Skyward Sword is significant because it's considered the first, right? This is the game that, according to this timeline, is the beginning where the entire legend starts out. And it's kind of interesting to point out that we just reached a point where Link was given the green tunic, but the green tunic is just a symbol of the school he's attending, right? He's just recently passed a trial and was thereby, you know, he's now a senior. He's now like in charge, somewhat. I mean, not in charge in the sense that he runs the school, but in the sense that he's reached the upper class of whatever the school structure is.
And you'll see this element repeated, of course, you know, in Wind Waker, he gets the tunic from his grandma, and we hear about this story that, you know, this is a pivotal part in kids' lives in that universe, and that it plays a bigger role. And, you know, Skyward Sword is actually the game that frames the rest of the Zelda story, and that it says that history essentially repeats itself, right? There's this curse that's created, and we'll go through this a little bit more. There's this curse that's created that repeats itself in almost every game, and this is where it happened. This is where it got all kicked off. But before that, you know, the backstory, the time the Legend of Zelda really starts is in the ancient days when the land and the sky were created, right? That's the Legend of Zelda creation myth, where you have three goddesses that create the world in a time of chaos.
That's right.
There's Din. That's the goddess of power. She created the land in this game. There's Nairu, the goddess of wisdom. She created order. There's Furore, the goddess of courage, and she created all the people and the creatures that live in this world, right?
Yeah.
And if you've played Ocarina of Time, you remember the beginning with the creepy music, and you see the goddesses and what they do. This was established a long time ago, and it's repeated everywhere.
Yeah, and they've done a great job of adapting sort of the three elements of the Triforce, right? Power, wisdom, and courage, and finding a way to expand it. Yes, so we're now inside the bazaar, and the bazaar is a really interesting place to be in because it's one of the few places in at least the Skyward Sword starting area where you see a lot of personality in the characters, and it's not just reflected in their animations and in the way they look at you, but it's also reflected in the music. Yep. When you go from person to person in this setup, you're also hearing the tune in the background adapt and kind of play a different song as you approach one of these corners, which is really cool, by the way. I don't think a prior Zelda had done that.
Yeah, like you can also see, I mean, we should probably talk a little bit about style, right?
Don't buy it this time, just to get the look on his face. Sorry, just from Brendan.
Don't buy it?
Yeah. Sorry, Per.
The interaction with the characters is just really cool. You know, they really build out these secondary. Here we go, no thanks. Yeah.
I love that. I love that if you don't want to buy it, he shoots you that look, and he's like, "Oh no, come back, yeah."
Yep. So
right.
the style of this game is kind of, it's halfway between Wind Waker, halfway between Ocarina of Time, some of the other games, in that it's almost like it has this painterly look to it.
Yep.
When you're far away, it kind of looks like a painting. As you get closer, it gets clearer. It's a look you either love or hate, or well, I guess you could be indifferent to it. I'm kind of indifferent to it, honestly. I don't like the color scheme. I'm a big fan of kind of like strong shadows and bright light and stuff, and this always reminds me of Pa's Easter colors. It's like this weird pastel look.
Interesting.
I love that it exists, but it is not my favorite style in the
It's
universe.
definitely very light and cheery, and a lot different than Twilight Princess, where everything was sort of dark and drab, more along the lines of maybe even Majora's Mask, although that's the darkest they've ever gone.
You can see it's like pointillism in the backdrop, right?
Yeah,
like
and you see in the background, like that tree way off in the distance will finally start getting some definition as he gets closer, which was really cool. I don't know. I really like the art style, but I do agree it's very warm and cheery and bright. But it's still something that I feel really works, or at least I'm glad it exists for that reason, because I always thought Wind Waker was sort of the peak of visual experimentation in Zelda, and that they just kind of went back to what they were doing before with Twilight Princess. There was just more definition.
And the one thing, it is the right choice for the console, right?
Yep.
This is the Wii. We're actually playing this on the Wii U. This is the Wii. It could not do HD visuals, of course, as you all know.
Yeah.
And so creating a game like a Twilight Princess that looks realistic is tough. It looks kind of grainy, and the Wii also wasn't very good at color, kind of brightness and darkness, the definition. It kind of looked all a little bit gray, and so this is actually a good direction for the Wii, I think.
Sure, yeah. Just to point out real quick, so he's riding Link's Loftwing. The Loftwing becomes the symbol that's on the shield, if you're familiar with The Legend of Zelda, which was also a really cool tie-in, and that's something that started around, I want to say it started on Ocarina or on Link to the Past. The sort of the emblem on the shield changed. Actually, on Link to the Past, it has wings, but in Ocarina, it actually looked a lot more bird-like. But riding the Loftwing, I especially like the motion control they chose to adapt for this game, because it's kind of like using reins, right? Where you're like moving your hand up and then down, like sort of like go. To get him to flap his wings. And then if you want to dive, it's a lot of the motion control that you see maybe in something like Wii Sports. Sort of like the plane games that they have in there. It's sort of like just gliding a paper airplane with your hands, so to speak.
I think the feel is really great. I wish, I'm a big fan of the open overworld games like Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess and, Wind Waker, which is a little closer to this, but not all the way. I was hoping they would let you do more in the sky, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's the one big shortcoming, I think, of this game. And I really like this game. I think it's a great game that does a lot of stuff that you haven't seen in other games before. But the sky's a little empty. Yeah,
the sky's a little empty, but I think the other shortcoming is definitely that then when you get down to the ground is a little aimless and a little weird. So they created these sort of outside areas to all of the temples, where Zeldas always have great dungeons. This one has fantastic dungeons, to its credit. But what you do outside in those little overworld areas is also very aimless and very meandering. You're constantly pulling out a compass to see where you need to go, which you'll see in a few minutes. But outside of that, I feel like this game, just going back to the story, does an excellent job of setting up the entire Zelda myth. I think it does a fantastic job, from the Master Sword to everything else.
It hits some emotional notes that the others didn't, right? There's a revelation. We're not going to spoil everything here, but there's a revelation later where a character is revealed that I thought they just played really nicely. And considering this is a game without voice acting, right? You read everything. It actually works really, really well. And you're like, wow, I didn't expect that.
Oh, for sure.
Just if you are not familiar with this game, or you haven't played it, or you're not planning to play it, the character we're talking to here is, of course, Fi. That's the embodiment of the sword that Link has, and she's basically your spirit guide, just like you had a fairy in the past, or you talk to Tetra via the stone in Wind Waker. You've got this guide who gives you hints and tells you what to do next, right?
Yeah.
And you can see the background of this when she gives you advice. It has this kind of crisscross pattern background.
Yeah.
It just really ties in nicely with the character.
I thought it was really kind of weird though that she's sort of like a robot in terms of her presentation, and her tone sounds very mechanical, even though this is sort of a legend. Oh, there you go. Yeah, there goes the Deku Baba that everyone's seen before. But again, I love how Zelda constantly redraws and redefines these characters.
Yeah.
Right? Isn't that and each game makes them visually unique in their own way.
Yep. So let's talk about combat. I mean, this is the big one, right? This is the game that when we first got the Wii, we all dreamt of a game that would give us sword control. We thought LucasArts was going to do it first.
With Star Wars.
By the way, there was a lightsaber game in the works that got canned. And
there was a Force Unleashed multiplayer mode that kind of flirted with the idea, but it had these weird like rotations you had to do, and it was doing it with the original Wii remote, not with Wii Motion Plus, which is what we're using. What was used for this Zelda, which was really great.
And obviously, Wii Sports Resort really showed you how you can handle sword controls, with a mini game in that one. And so this game just runs with it. You can swing horizontally and up and down. You can do different kind of stab moves and stuff. And so it plays into the battle system. What happens, though, is that it does feel a little bit more chess-like, where it's like, the enemies are waiting for you to do something rather than constantly attacking you.
That's right.
And so it becomes more tactical than action-packed in this game. And, it's a style choice. You can like it or not. But I thought it was just a really interesting thing to do.
Definitely. No, I agree. And some people will argue that for motion controls, they feel this has presented some of the best combat in Zelda. I tend to disagree. I feel like Wind Waker was sort of the pinnacle of that style, but that was more a button style where this is motion control. But I give them a lot of credit for what they pulled off with this.
So let's go back a little bit into the background story. We just saw Demise, and Demise is this weird creature. I mean, it looks almost like out of a Miyazaki Studio Ghibli movie, more than out of the Zelda universe, right?
That's right.
It's such a strange character design, but, of course it is revealed that Demise, this creature is not the... is not the ultimate form that you will see. Like this creature evolves, and you'll see it a couple of times in this game. But back to the beginning myth, right? The goddesses created the earth and the lands and everything. And they leave behind the Triforce, so the 3 golden triangles. We have no idea why they did that. It's never explained. But whoever gets these triangles can make any dreams and desires come true.
That's right.
And they leave it in the care of the goddess Hylia, right? And Hylia, you'll recognize the name from later games or earlier games. And, of course, Hyrule is named after this goddess. The Triforce is the MacGuffin, right? Like, that's what Hitchcock described as the thing you go after, but it doesn't ultimately matter. Like, it doesn't really do that much, right? It can be a bomb in a suitcase, or it can be, like a blacklist or whatever in movies and games.
And it's never a pivotal factor in the final battle of any Zelda that I can remember, right? But it's something that you're always trying to put back together or find for the most part.
So the good guy wants it because the bad guy wants it is basically the story, right? Because the bad guy's going to...
Or the good guy's trying to stop the bad guy from using it, basically. No, that's
so,
right.
Right now we're in Farron, the forest area, right?
That's right.
There's also Lanairu, the desert, and Eldin. All 3 are named after the goddesses, so, they tie in directly with Din, right? Eldin, Din, Nairu, Lanairu, Farron, Faror. Like, it's really clever. One cool thing that you can do with this map is you can overlay it over the Ocarina of Time map, and you see, the forest is here, and the desert is here, and the, Death Mountain volcano area is here. It's just really cool that they have kind of this element go through.
Sure.
And, it works with some of the other games as well, not as well with Link to the Past, but, Wind Waker, and we'll talk about that, of course, a little bit more once we get to those games.
Sure, definitely.
But so this game has the goddesses everywhere, and so you can touch the Triforce. Your wish comes true. Good or bad doesn't matter. If the person doesn't possess the 3 virtues of the goddesses, power, wisdom, and courage set up, the Triforce splits apart, right? And the finder gets whichever piece he personifies. So like a nasty guy like Ganon is all about power, of course. Whereas Zelda would be about wisdom, Link, courage. And so if one of these 3 wouldn't possess all the 3 virtues, it would split. And the other pieces then appear in the hands of the chosen.
That's right.
To get the power, what do you got to do? Got to take all 3 pieces and reunite them to build back the Triforce, right? It can't be unstable.
Really quickly, remember when in the first Legend of Zelda there were only 2 Triforces? It was power and wisdom. And Zelda 2 was the one that brought in the courage, right? I mean, we'll get to that when we get to that.
That's right.
I completely forgot about that until now.
So The one story that hasn't really been told in Zelda games is kind of what happens next, right? It's the era of the goddess of Hylia, and it happens a little bit in this game, but basically, you know, the demons go after the Triforce, their leader, the Demon King Demise, you know, you can guess who it is, even if you haven't played this game, right?
It's always the same guy.
He gets close to it. Hylia takes a plot of land from the ground, sends it up into the sky with the Triforce to protect it, and, you know, the goddess and tribes battle against Demise and manage to seal him away.
Yep, that's right.
But the seal is weak. Like in every Zelda game, whenever Ganon or Demise or whoever is sealed away, something happens and it gets weaker and weaker. So she tries to use the Triforce to defeat Demise, but there are all these rules, just like with Gremlins, right? Don't feed them after midnight. The goddesses cannot wield the Triforce, and so, you know, she chooses to be reborn as a human.
Okay.
And that's the basic setup for this game, right?
And they have a statue to her at the beginning. There's a whole tradition that's done every year at the school according to this legend and this myth.
Yep.
There's a setup, and even they do a great job of even kind of, you know, tying Zelda into it, where she's sort of playing the role of the goddess Hylia in the whole tradition. She's also hearing voices where she's wondering, you know, why do I feel like something on the ground is calling to me? And they do a pretty good job of setting it up. Not too obvious. I feel like I enjoy that, and I enjoy it.
And it's a little bit, I mean, we've seen this storyline before in stories like, you know, if you think of the classic movie The Mummy, for example, or even the Bram Stoker's Dracula, the Coppola adaptation, which changed the original story to have that kind of reincarnation factor where there's a character who remembers something for their past, but they're not sure what it is, and then, of course, history repeats itself. And they have this element here, too. And, you know, speaking of history repeats itself, you know, Hylia entrusts a Sheikah named Impa with guarding the imprisoned Demon King, right, until she returns.
Your timing is wonderful, sir. Yeah, perhaps.
Yeah, perhaps. So yeah, we've got this, you know, we've got this background story about this kind of ancient battle.
Yeah.
You know, now this game takes place thousands of years later after this whole thing, and you know, the characters are of course Link or whatever you choose to name your character. I don't know. Do you put in Link?
I always put in Link. I think I haven't put in my name since Zelda 2, probably, or maybe even Zelda 3. But I would always put Link to begin with, because it would feel weird having them say my name when I know who the character is. I appreciate that they would let me put my name in, but it's kind of like playing Final Fantasy VII. No one renames Cloud, right? They put in, you know, they leave it as is.
Do you think there are a lot of people out there who name the character Zelda?
Well, maybe, or they name it something inappropriate. Who knows?
They start playing and they're like, "Oh, this is the Legend of Zelda. Let me put in Zelda."
Yeah, well, wasn't that the secret in the first Zelda? Also, if you wrote in Zelda, you would unlock sort of a second quest. There'd be like a sword in his hand. There was like weird little things.
I never tried
it
on this one. So if you're watching this, please try entering Zelda and see if anything happens.
It's probably been done.
Leave us a comment. I forget. It's been a while. Huh? Oh yeah, Link's Awakening. You could change the menu music like that. Yeah. So anyway, so Hylia is now in the sky, right? There's this Isle of the Goddess. It's floating up there, and that's where the game starts. And you know, again, it's like
the land is considered poisonous, right? No one goes down there. It's completely covered in shadow. And it's considered too dangerous because the creatures there are too dangerous. We live in the Sky World, and we are safe up here. Yeah. Is sort of the setup.
And everybody who lives in this new world, Skyloft, you know, to them, everything that happened before are legends. They're not sure if they're true. They might be a kernel of truth to it, but they know you can't go to the ground downstairs, and they don't ask too many questions about it either, right? And in this town, there's this keeper of legends, Gaipora, you know, who, of course, appears in many Zelda games. He appears as a wise owl later, and you can see the design of the character looks kind of like an owl still, right?
And he's in this game. You may have seen him earlier. He's the guy we were talking to when Link awoke and was putting on the green tunic. He's the headmaster of the school, and he's also Zelda's father in this one. But that's not... I don't want to say it's canon. It's just, it's not always something that's repeated. He doesn't always play Zelda's father, but he does play as an assistant, someone who comes along and will help you through the adventure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So then in the storyline, you know, a girl named Zelda is born. She's, of course, Hylia reincarnated.
That's
and, you know, this whole story kind of plays towards the battle kind of repeating itself and you know, Demise, the Demon King, being sealed away. The person we haven't seen yet is the big bad guy of this game, right? Ghirahim, who, you know, for whatever reason, he just really loves Demise, or you know, whoever that is gathering forces, and he's trying to find the goddess, and he's trying to resurrect the Demon King.
He's quite a crafty kind of villain too. I mean, in the first boss fight with him, he's somewhat difficult because he catches your blade with 2 fingers, and will kind of pull it to the side, and you have to find the best way to take a stab at him and swing at him.
That drove me nuts the first time I played it.
A lot of people
what do you
went
do,
nuts.
right? A lot of people get stuck on that and go like, what do you do? And you have to be actually really subtle in your movements. You know, you can fake your attack, and you know, it's one of the creepiest characters I'd say in the Zelda series. He's got this
a weird
nasty tongue, and like in Japanese folklore, a lot of ghosts actually have these long tongues. You see that in Chinese mythology as well.
Wow,
so
take in this temple for a second. Like, whoa, this looks good.
It's cool.
Oh, there goes dowsing, our favorite thing. So what are we looking for? Let's look for... Oh, I was going to say look for Zelda. And that was a cool thing this story did, right? I mean, when this sort of event happens in Zelda, am I fast forwarding? Do you have that? Like,
no, good. Keep going. Yeah.
Zelda gets she basically falls to the ground, not to the ground, but into the lower world that no one enters.
That's Ghirahim gets a tornado to basically knock her down,
knock her into this world, and then you find out she's on the same quest as you, and you are both trying to basically fulfill a destiny. But what I really enjoyed about this game is that she is, and you don't see this until the end credits, but you see her journey, her adventure. She's in all the places you were. She was doing her own thing and carrying out her own portion of her destiny, which I thought was really interesting.
Cool.
I mean, I wish we could have played some of that, but at the same time, I like that slowly Zelda has sort of transformed from another, damsel in distress to a character that actually has a big, sort of meaning to this world. I mean, in Wind Waker, she had her own sort of role. I feel in Spirit Tracks, it was one of the most active roles she's ever had in a game, which we'll eventually play, the DS game. And in this one, she has a pretty unique role as well. There goes that combat. Check that out.
Yeah, here's the combat, and you see, of course, another character that, who ties the worlds together, right? He's a Goron. You guys all remember them from Ocarina of Time, of course. They're returning characters from the world to tie it all into one. The one thing I didn't like, I hate the Bokoblin and Moblin models. Like the way they look in this game, I thought they looked so much better in Wind Waker and in Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess. And I wish they would. They went a little bit too weird fairy tale book with it.
You think so?
Here.
Yeah. No, I did enjoy the Moblins, especially in Wind Waker, are some of my favorite. Right? They have just that unique way to walk around and show off their power. They're really burly. Their whole upper body is huge, and they have these tiny legs. And they walk around, and their lip just kind of protrudes and flaps back and forth. Everything is so beautifully animated in that game.
This one feels a little stiffer. Everything is a little stiffer.
Even though the presentation is much better than Wind Waker, which Wind Waker just came out again for those listening, and the re-release. A lot of the presentation in that game shows a bit of its age, whereas in this one, you do see it's a bit more updated.
So, the story that's going on in parallel is, so Link has met Fi, right, the sword spirit, and is on this quest now. Zelda actually met the old lady we saw earlier, and she's being told by this old lady, to go cleanse herself in the Skyview and Earth Springs, basically the Sky and Earth temples versions in this world. And so that's happening at the same time. And then, what Zelda is trying to go ultimately try to do is to go to the Temple of Time in the desert. Temple of Time is in this game, which is awesome. Like when you discover like all the similarities to the older game, and she tries to go back to the ancient era to seal Demise, right? She's trying to fix this thing she couldn't do when she was the goddess Hylia.
That's right.
And then
quickly to point out, just when you mentioned the Master Sword earlier too, I thought this game had the coolest moment of pulling the actual Master Sword of all the Zeldas, right? Because it's come up in every one since Ocarina. You eventually have to find your way to the place to get it. But this was the first one that, going back to technology for a second, because of the motion controls, you were physically the person pulling it out and holding up. And check this out. So you can't see this because you're listening, but I have my hand turned my wrist sort of turned clockwise. When I pulled the sword out and they make you hold it up, a coworker was watching me, and I just turned to him like this. He saw what I was doing. I was like, oh my God. Because I couldn't believe they put that moment in there, and they made you a really big part of it versus any other game in the series.
I think it's cool, too, when you turn the sword. I mean, in the beginning, it's, of course, not the Master Sword, right? Like, at the end of the game, you upgrade it. Like, it gets all this power.
Well, you've been doing that in all of them, too, since the Master Sword has come into these games.
So, technically, Master Sword is what it's called at the end. But when you first pull the sword and you're, like, turning it, it's so cool just being able to see the reaction, you know?
Rotate your wrist, when the sword is out. Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's really cool. And then, the story here, we're not going to see all this, but here we go. You can lift up the sword. You can, of course, power it up when you hold it straight up like that.
There, and then do the Skyward Strike. It does look a little weird to run around with the sword out, though, because he does look a little bizarre. I don't know. I would always find that kind of funny looking, at least to me. But it's a small thing, not something that I felt was, a huge detractor.
And here, one thing, we'll talk about Twilight Princess much later. But Twilight Princess was the game that made Link right-handed again, right? Like he in most of the games.
On Wii it did. On Wii it was.
He's left-handed, but in the GameCube version of Twilight Princess, he's left-handed.
Yeah, but on the Wii version, he's right-handed.
That's right.
So there's that.
And of course, you know why that is. It's because the Wii remote is usually in people's right hand, right? And so they wanted to have this kind of one-for-one.
But then if you put it in your left, the character doesn't invert. Just putting that out there. And Wind Waker's the first time in a while Link's been left-handed again, at least on a main. Major console game, not on the portables. He's still left-handed.
Yep. And so just if you don't want to hear how the story progresses, cover your ears and go yeah for a couple of minutes. But basically, Zelda tries to go back in time. Link battles Ghirahim. Impa destroys the gate, and then since the gate of time at the Sealed Temple is broken, all sorts of crazy stuff happens. All sorts of shenanigans here. Link fights Demise, upgrades his sword to the Master Sword, and then steps through the other gate of time. There are two in this game, and so now stuff gets down to the end where, seriously, spoilers, turn away now. In order to seal Demise, Zelda must sleep in the Sealed Temple forever, basically, be entombed in a crystal like we've seen her in the past. Yep. The surface then, basically we're seeing history repeat itself, right? The surface becomes stable, thousands of years pass, but, history is altered slightly, and then Link back in his own time finds the Triforce, returns, returns to the sealed grounds. Zelda awakens, so now it's in the future, and Ghirahim once again appears, takes her back to the past, resurrects the Demon King, and then you get this big climactic battle.
Yeah, you get the face-off. And this is quite a face-off. It looks fantastic if you haven't seen it. If you have seen it, you know what we're talking about. It looks amazing, because that final form is probably one of the better interpretations of that specific character. At least visually. He looks very majestic, very powerful, sort of flaming hair, incredible.
It's just really cool, right?
It is very cool.
And so, of course, the kicker then is, Link defeats him, if you're good enough.
Who isn't good enough?
Come on. Otherwise, go get your friend to do it for you. And then he's actually instead of being sealed in the ground like before, he's sealed in the Master Sword. The Master Sword now has also this evil energy in it in this game, right? Which
you mentioned, too, Ghirahim was his sword, right? Sorry, I was paying attention because earlier we were having some combat issues, but it seemed to be worked out. Because that was also a cool reveal, right? You find out Ghirahim is the sort of parallel to Fi.
That's right.
But he's sort of, off doing his own thing, and he is actually at the center of this. And again, we're still in spoiler territory.
Yeah. So, and then, everything, they return to the present after this big battle in the past, right? So now this battle in the past actually becomes legend, which is really cool. There's peace. Zelda will live on the surface to protect the Triforce, just like Hylia did before her.
Yep.
And Impa lives in the past to protect the Master Sword.
That's right.
So it's kind of like the timelines are split, and there may be some paradoxes if you want to go deeper and look into it. But basically what happens is now the cycle is created, right? The reincarnation of this Demon King, this bad guy, who we all know is, of course, spoiler, Ganon, right? Or sometimes Ganondorf, just keeps on getting repeated and repeated. He's got this hatred for the descendants of the goddess and for the spirit of the hero. And so even if some of the Links and Zeldas are not directly related by bloodline, they're related in spirit, right? There's this kid in future games who picks up the mantle, literally, right? The green tunic.
It's passed down. Yeah.
And that's the spirit of the hero, and instantly he's the antagonist for this Demon King, who's Ganon, who comes back.
So the one thing I found weird, and I know this story sort of sets everything up as, looks sort of like we mentioned earlier, like that Link is sort of given this green tunic. It just happens to be the uniform of school, etc. To me, Ocarina kind of set up a lot of that story, and there wasn't the outfit was handed down, more that you woke up and this is what the forest kids wore, right? In that town. You were just a boy without a fairy, but then that legend, and we'll get into that when we get to that game, sort of sprouts from there. And I just thought it had a great sort of natural way to begin. But this still does, for the most part, a fantastic job of setting up that story and setting up the legend as it is.
Yeah, let's face it. It is the storyline, the overall storyline is one that was created after a lot of these games were created. So it is kind of sledgehammered in a way, right? It is not it was not always planned to be like that. What was planned is that this story is being retold in different ways, and so they kind of, they connected the dots a little bit, and so the tunic is not always given to somebody they're elected. In this case, like a boy is in a town clad in green, and so kind of inherits that role. It works in the end, but there are definitely plot holes. But, the cool thing about this world now is that the surface area, so the stuff that's not in the sky, becomes Hyrule. That is Hyrule, and the people who live there, who are the descendants of Hylia, the goddess, are of course the Hylians, and that's something that you see repeated in a lot of the games.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very
so
cool.
it's a neat origin story, I think, for the entire series, and I do think it does a really nice job at you dousing.
You see him hiding behind the mushroom?
Yeah.
Black the mushroom, dude.
So I mean, we can quickly go into some of the new things in this series, in this title as well, since we're going to do that with later games. Like you see this creature, the Kikwi creature. Those guys were not in any of the older games, but they of course remind you of characters from Wind Waker.
Yeah, it looks like a unique blend of the characters that were on the Forest Temple area.
The Koroks and the
the Forbidden Forest. Correct. Excuse me. Correction. Yeah. It looks a lot like those little guys.
Yeah, it's really cool. But, other things that this game introduced outside of the motion controls are, the concept of gratitude crystals. Fans of Majora's Mask will probably fondly recall all the quests you could do specifically around characters. And this game brings those back and gives you this tangible reward, right? You're racking up these crystals.
This game also reintroduced the dash, but into 3D Zeldas, because no 3D Zelda before this had sort of the dash, and they introduced it in a smart way. You would use it to run up hills, to set up other sort of traversal puzzles or movement puzzles, etc. So it was a really important resource, and they added sort of a timer to it, right?
Meter,
you had fatigue. They also tied it into climbing, which was a little weird at first, right? Because in all the other 3D Zeldas, you can climb without any worry of really ever getting tired or fatigued, whereas in this one, you had a set amount of time, so you had to hurry up and climb across quickly.
Yep. Yeah. And if you follow games media, there was kind of like one of those mini freakouts online whenever anything new is revealed, where people were instantly shunning the idea of a fatigue meter.
I thought it was fine. It worked fine into the puzzles.
I think they did a good job integrating it and kind of naturally limiting some of the things that you can do. Right?
Yeah.
Like this series is famous for its item gates. Basically you cannot pass a certain point because you don't have the right item.
That's right.
And they actually use the fatigue meter for some of those things too, and let you upgrade it. So
was there really an outrage for that, the fatigue thing?
Huh?
I wasn't.
It was a mini outrage.
Yeah,
I exaggerate.
Okay,
it was
just
probably
to be sure.
Just two people.
Yeah, maybe.
And then other new things that we saw in this one, right? We have the sailcloth, which kind of harkens back to Wind Waker in a way.
Yeah.
Jose, you were saying that it would have been cool if it had the symbol from Wind Waker.
It would have been so cool, if you see the sort of the same pattern that's eventually on the one that you used for the King of Red Lions. But it doesn't have that, but that's fine. Just a slight missed opportunity.
Story, right?
It's still, and plus it would be weird. Like it's the same exact cloth. But at the same time, that consistency would have been very cool.
Yeah, and it's, this game introduces
these moblins are ugly. Sorry.
Yeah, they're very ugly.
Yeah.
This game introduces some new items like the beetle.
That's right.
You've got this beetle that you can use.
The beetle was very cool.
To fly around. It's cool. It's kind of like almost like a spy gadget that we've seen in older games before,
Also, it introduced the idea of being able to pocket, nice job, to pocket bombs. Once you get the bomb bag, you would be able to, you can pluck a bomb out of the ground and then tuck it away in your bag, which was something that didn't always, anytime you pulled a bomb before that, like in Wind Waker or in Ocarina, you had to use it.
Yeah, because the bomb plants instantly start. They have a fuse. The moment you pluck them, they'll blow up. But in this game, you could actually put those away. And the only bombs you could collect in the past, once you had the bomb bag, were the ones that appeared as power-ups in pots and things. So I love that they did that. I think it's really cool.
Well, and there were unique and smart uses to, because the Wii Remote and Nunchuck have sort of limited space, right, for how many things you can really map to inventory. So they did come up with a really, what I thought was a cool solution in the item pouch, where you can set up 4 items just to quickly grab, at least at the beginning, and then it eventually becomes a rotating inventory wheel. If you can show that really quick, just the item Yeah. So then you would pick, what you need and what's equipped and whatnot from there. Also, really quick, on the UI front, this is dowsing, by the way. On the UI front, I thought they did something really smart, where if you sort of go to the gear menu really quick, you would see just the one button. There you go. Cool. Yeah, see that one? Awesome. Go to interface, and they set up that you can change the interface from light, standard, so this is light. You notice the Wii remote is gone. The little controller that was on the left is gone. They also have Pro, which, if you're a pro, take everything completely away from the UI because you pretty much know what you're in for and know how to play. Yeah, I thought that was really smart. No other Zelda, I feel, before this had something like that.
Yep. And then, if you see his shield, which of course you can't see right now,
yeah,
but if you equip it again, one element that this game has more than any other is a light RPG element. And the Zelda franchise, we categorize here at IGN as action adventures because
or action RPG.
We call them action adventures.
Really?
So I noticed you call it an action RPG.
Let's talk about this.
Well, no, because we define RPGs as games that use stats building to get over hurdles, right? RPGs harken back to the Dungeons and Dragons days, and so the amount of power your character has in an attack plays a bigger role than the actual the prowess or the skills.
So by that definition, Zelda 2 is the only action RPG in the series.
Yeah.
Ouch.
So the entire series is action adventures except for Zelda 2. But what this game actually does, and I have a feeling future games will build on that more, adds more RPG elements. Namely, you can upgrade your shields, right? You go into the bazaar and you can actually upgrade items, on a set path. It's not something like in the Elder Scrolls where there are hundreds of or thousands of items, but it does add many more RPG elements to this game.
I kind of wish they would do the same thing, but with the swords as well. Give you a little bit more time before you get to the Master Sword, which would be the ultimate sword. I mean, don't get me wrong, they somewhat do that because you pull the Divine Sword, and then over time, you turn it into the Master Sword, but I think it would have been kind of cool. Also, this game, for being a post-Wind Waker game, completely, except for one boss, completely tossed away the notion of using enemy weapons, of picking them up and using them to fight enemies. There's one boss where you do it, and it's probably one of the coolest boss fights in this game, and easily one of my favorites, and a lot of people's favorite as well. But it just did away with that, which was kind of surprising to me.
Yeah, and I like sometimes I like the limitation of items and weapons, right? In that whenever you find something new, it is so meaningful. And the Legend of Zelda series, out of all games, really nailed this early. When you find a new item, you feel awesome. It's got this amazing music when you open the chest. You hold it up, it's da-da-da-da, and guess what? To get out of the room that you found it in, you got to use that item right away. And so you get to actually try it out. It's almost like this playground where they, specifically give you things to do with that item you just got.
Yeah, and they immediately give it context in terms of how you can use it, in terms of what ways to intelligently then figure out the puzzles. And usually it'll then allow you access to another section of the dungeon itself, right? Which is pretty cool.
And I could imagine that future games give you more things to pick up, but still have kind of like the limitations that he cannot use a hammer yet in the quest, right? So you got to learn how to use it. I could see them going that route. Here, of course, a serious staple, refreshment by fairy.
Yep.
By the way, it's so sad in Wind Waker when you put a fairy in the glass.
Yeah,
it just looks so sad.
They have a little tear in their eye. Yeah. This is something I wish would go away from games in general. This is not Zelda's fault at all, but the whole on the tightrope thing, let's be done with it, please. Next gen, do me that favor.
Yeah. So there are certain gameplay elements that are repeated in the games over the years. One is of course the combat and finding an item in the dungeon, finding the keys to open the doors. Assembling or opening a door with 3 amulets. We have these recurring elements. The one thing they've done a lot since Link to the Past, lightly, but Ocarina of Time more so, was the stealth element. You got to sneak past people. In this game, they make that a huge element. With these kind of creepy...
The Phantom Trials?
Yeah, the Silent Realm, they have this kind of, they combine it with the Twilight Princess quest and the elements from the handheld games, where you have this hardcore stealth mission gameplay where you cannot be seen. And in this game, you know, we're not going to have the time to show you that. You have to fill your spirit vessel by collecting these tears, and you know, you pick up these light fruit to look at them. It's this weird element. It feels a little out of place.
Well, it's not just out of place. It's reused 3 times, which was one of my like sore points with this game, where that quest in particular was part of a chain that had to do with the goddess, right? These are the goddess trials, and it was something very significant in the story, and yet they were all the same trial, which to me was like, is the goddess crazy? Like, is this the best you know you can do, really? And it's like, no. I was hoping for more variety. I was hoping to see just a little bit more. Like, if the first one was just the silent realm, you must be stealthy thing, fine, but then make the other 2 something completely different.
I will say that it was genuinely creepy, though. Like that, I was, you know, not scared by the characters, but just scared for Link's life. Like, you had to really run to bolt back, and I thought that was.
And
really
you had to do it completely unseen or be chased by a ghost the entire time. And if they were chasing you, chances are they would catch you.
But I could do without that kind of repeating element that the DS game has. I like it better when an area is changed and you revisit it and you have to try something new, like, or, you know, kind of Metroid and Zelda style. You have like the hook shot and you now get into a new area. Now, of course, this area later in the game gets flooded, right?
That's right.
So this area completely changes. You don't get a significant, awesome kind of water temple-like quest out of it. It's more of a fetch quest, unfortunately. But unfortunate. I love that concept of like changing an area by having it flood or something breaking apart.
Oh, definitely, yeah. No, and I did like seeing a new look to that space. I just wish that again, this was one of those quests that I felt like didn't need to be there, right? Because they have you revisit a character that you saved earlier in this zone. It's sort of a serpent queen kind of thing. She's a dragon. And she knows who you are. She knows you're a chosen hero. She knows why you're there. And yet she chooses not to give you the item and breaks it in front of you. And at that point, I broke inside and you know, had a long talk with former IGN editor Rich George about how I felt, you know, as good as a lot of this game was, some of it was wasting my time, or it just didn't feel like it was doing the things I was hoping it would be doing. The variety and the you know, sort of the constant surprises weren't there.
It was creating chores. I think it depends on how you play your games too, whether that matters to you or not.
That's true.
Right? Like if you want to get through this game in the course of a week, you know, it matters a lot more than if you're taking breaks between the games. I think with story-based games, usually people want to play them, you know, don't want to take too much of a break between elements, but that's where the repetitious elements are heightened. And I feel like the DS game need to get away from that central repetitive element because honestly it's not that fun, right? Like if the repetition, if the element that gets repeated is just an awesome gameplay element, then it'd be a different story. I think one final note on this game, you know, we talked about style, music. You know, there are a lot of melodies.
Some of the best.
Yeah, and then a lot of melodies from the past come back, and I think one of the best elements is that, you know, there's a prominent Zelda theme played backwards that becomes becomes the element that gets repeated everywhere.
Wasn't that a great surprise when that happened?
And so yes, if you play the main theme backwards, you will of course get you know, a recognizable theme from many of the Zelda games. Which is
just another quick note for folks is that this game was directed by Hidemaru Fujibayashi, and Fujibayashi was originally a Capcom employee. And you can read about this on IGN.com right now. Actually, we have a great feature by Tatsuya called The Legends Behind the Legend of Zelda. But this particular director, Fujibayashi, was formerly Capcom Flagship. And he was the director in charge of Oracle of Seasons and Ages. And I believe he also worked on Minish Cap before he ended up directing his own 3D Zelda. So that's just something for folks, you know, if you're interested in like some of the background of some of the creators, specifically one of the major roles on this game. That would be something, you know, you should look into or should know about.
Yeah, and we'll definitely talk about Flagship and the role Capcom played in the franchise when we get to those games. But I mean, that was a big shift for Nintendo to give up control of one of the biggest franchises to an external studio.
That's right, and we all know it didn't go so well when the CDI got a hold of those. Was that Philips?
That's different.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was a younger Nintendo, maybe not
We'll get to that.
understanding.
Nintendo
Yeah.
does not ever talk about those games, and I mean,
Nope.
for good reason. It was a licensing mistake that they made, and
Yep.
you know, again, we'll talk more about that. That mistake didn't just create two truly terrible CDI Zelda games and one really bad one. It also created the PlayStation, right? And so we'll get to that piece of history as we play through these games, and we'll get to the CDI games. Hopefully you like this commentary on this game, and you'll be with us. If we made any mistakes, remember it's all Jose's fault, and let us know your comments on what you would like us to focus on in the future. You know, what elements you want us to go into, or what areas you want us to explore in the future games.
Yeah, and we'll be going through all of these games in timeline order again, so look forward to that every Saturday, at least for the next couple of Saturdays until we're done with the timeline.
Yep, and if you want to give us direct feedback, not via the comments, you can email us, of course, at nvc@ign.com, or you can tweet at us. I'm PearIGN, one word on Twitter.
I am Jose_Otero, and you can also read about Zelda Week here on IGN as well, so make sure to check out those articles.
That's great.
Cool. Well, thanks for joining us, and we'll be back next week.
Bye.